Hello and welcome to the Bike Circus. I'm Jack. I'm one of the older yard dogs here. I'm the oldest yard dog here. I won't say one of, because even Graham with all his gray hair is not as old as me. Although he's a higher mileage model, so it's hard to argue which way we go with that. My topic is the shark-infested waters of electric bike purchase. And I could end it right now by saying buy locally, buy new, but I think I might be a little more persuasive if I give you some background about electric bikes and how we came by them. Sometime in the 1970s, there were bicycles with petrol engines, front-mounted petrol engines. They mounted on the fork. The most infamous of them was called the Chicken Power. And I had the pleasure of having a chicken-powered bike at one point. And they did provide about 1 horsepower of traction on the front wheel of a bicycle. They made a terrible racket, and because all the weight was on the front, and they tended to oversteer and drive your head into the ground, and it made them kind of awkward to drive. Shortly after the Chicken Power, well, actually maybe a decade or two after the Chicken Power, we're talking about 1992, 93, 94, a company called ZAP, Zero Air Pollution, who were still in business. They're now in China. They were of California then. There's a message there, I guess. But Zero Air Pollution offered an electric assist, which consisted of a little motor that fit on the back of the bike behind the seat post, and by friction engaged the rear wheel. That was a lot safer than the Chicken Power front wheel, but it still had the problem of being too much too soon. The little Zap, I had one, a Zap DX, and they were on or they were off. And when they were on, you get whiplash when it came on, and then you let go and it's off. So they were great. Just parenthetically, you can still buy that kind of electric assist, and they just provide a zap of power when you toggle a toggle switch. They're fun. I still have a desire to get an adult green machine. What do they call those things? Drifters now, or drifters. They call them drifters. I still like to try one of those, and I understand that the primary power source for them is a very similar electric motor now, and they can be a lot of fun. Anyhow, right now, if you're buying an electric bicycle, the first warning is to look for an engine, a motor, a power system that has a warranty. Bosch and Bafang both are sold in the EU, and both of them come with complete warranties, and that makes a huge difference. And I'll start to tell you the real story. I have a story of 2 trikes here to tell today, to give you some idea of how bad things can be and how good they can be. If you look, other than the cosmetics, these 2 tricycles look very similar. And you might think it wouldn't make any difference, and so you could shop for price. But actually, this tricycle was made in China and was sold on the internet to a local woman who bought it, and she paid 1,100 euros for it. This tricycle just appeared. It's probably 30 or 40 years old, appeared outside the yard, and we fitted it out. Our fitting of this bicycle cost us, I'm having to guesstimate because I was fitting it for myself and I repressed the numbers, but it's about 2,000 to 2,500 in parts for this bike, and yet they look so much different. They're both electric driven, but that's where the difference begins to show. The market right now, the bicycle market, is just awash with the cheapest possible bicycles installed with the cheapest possible motors done somewhere in China. This particular bicycle was assembled in China. The motor, I haven't yet figured out who made it, but it's a hub motor, and that's one of the tells that it's an inexpensive bike, because hub motors, while they're convenient, their assembly is very convenient and simple to do, really. They just build the motor into the hub of the front wheel, or sometimes the rear wheel. And we have an example here on the rack of a rear wheel hub motor. The motor's just integral with the wheel, and you think that's very elegant. I think it's elegant too. I have to tell you that after riding the Chicken Power and the little DX bikes that I mentioned earlier, I invented, in the sense of there wasn't available on the market, and I thought about it, I invented the hub motor because I thought that'd really be great if you just build the motor into the hub. You'd save components and you'd save time. And they are a pretty interesting technology. They have some problems. The one problem is that if you put the power in the front, the weight as you go uphill tends to shift towards the rear of the machine, and you start losing traction when you need it the most. That's one of the problems. The other problem is that hub motors do not get the benefit of the gearing in a mid-mounted motor. What's a mid-mounted motor? This is one here. You see the motor underneath the crankset? That motor transmits its power to the rear wheel via the chain. The mid-mounted motor has two advantages. The one is just balance. It's a better place to put the weight of the motor in the middle of the bike. The other is that whatever gearing you're using as a cyclist, the motor gets the benefit of that. The hub motors are just direct drive, so there is no gearing. They are what they are. And if you wanted to rule of thumb, a hub motor's got about a 3 or 4 year life expectancy, and a mid-mount motor has maybe an 8-year life expectancy. That's assuming you use it gently and appropriately. Don't thrash it too dramatically. So, but the hub motors, in their way, one way to understand them is to think about driving a car always in second gear. And that's kind of what the hub motor is doing. But the other thing to think about is the delivery of power and the bicycle itself. If you use the very cheapest equipment, it's of course not going to last as long. So if you use a frame or components that are less expensive, they won't last as long as the frame or components that are more expensive. So for instance, this crankset here is made out of steel. Steel collarless cranksets of that variety haven't been made since the 1970s, maybe into the early 80s. So that means that when this bike was built, they found a pile of old cranksets and got a real good deal on them because they're made out of steel and they're heavy and they're eclipsed technology. Move forward to this crankset. That's aluminum or some alloy that it's made from, so you know that it's modern. That tendency to use cheap components to keep the price down on your internet special bike, in this particular bike, but the rear brake on this bike is a drum brake, and the brake shoe itself is a piece of leather, like shoe leather, I took you could take the tongue of an old leather shoe, cut it, and install it. And so if you're into having something you could repair endlessly, that's a nice thing. I haven't seen a shoe break like that since my childhood, a few years ago. They just don't make them like that anymore. And there's a reason they don't make them like that anymore. This brake, that rear brake, would not stop this bicycle going down any reasonable gradient. Dry. Wet, you have no hope. It's absolutely unsafe as a brake, and yet it was installed in a machine bought within the last year or two on the internet. Why did they use such an antique brake? Because they found a mountain of them somewhere in some warehouse, and somebody paid him to haul them away, and then they installed them on this bike. Similarly, the front brake on this bike is a V-brake. V-brakes are the standard brake now throughout the bicycle industry, and they're standard because they install easily and they fix easily, they repair easily. They're not the best brake you can buy for stopping, which is what a brake is supposed to do. This particular V-brake is made out of the cheapest possible materials. It's pressed steel, so that the whole braking system here is deficient. Now, the purchaser paid 1,100 euros for this and got a machine that as a tricycle isn't very good. As a powered bike, it's scary. I've gotten leery of what I'll ride nowadays. And this thing under power on flat land would be okay. But if you just went up a hill and then wanted to come back down it, you'd be in a world of trouble. Notice significant differences over here. This trike, you can see down here, has a hydraulic disc brake, front and rear hydraulic disc brakes. Those brakes will stop this bicycle on any hill in any weather. That's really important. This bike also has a sprung fork. Now, on non-powered bikes, that's not such a big deal, but on a powered trike, it's almost should be required, because a trike occupies a lot of road and you can't steer around potholes. You just end up having to eat some potholes. That sprung front fork is really, really valuable there. It makes a huge difference to me. Let's talk about power and power delivery in general. And I started off on this a moment ago and then got distracted. I blame Ari, but have to have someone to blame Ari, and I can't see where Graham went, so you're next. The power transmission system of all e-bikes, or almost all e-bikes, was not meant for the power it's getting. A human being in good shape can deliver about 250 watts of horsepower at peak performance for a limited period of time. The cheapest, smallest electric bike you're going to buy has a 250 watt motor. So that means at the least, a bike system, an e-bike, is taking twice the power it was engineered to take. Full stop. So that even this bike, there's a motor, mid-mount motor, there's the chain delivering power right in. That chain will wear out a lot faster than a regular chain, and they're prone to falling apart. That's just because the industry hasn't caught up with the technology, and there are so many good older design push bike design bikes out there. So we're making do with that now. But Bosch, Pinion, and others are designing the e-bikes of the future, and some of their capabilities are appearing now in the market. And they're very elegant and they're very expensive. But let me give you a checklist of things to look for if you're buying an e-bike. And the first thing is brand name, the motor. One of the problems with repairing this bike, and we're undertaking that to make it a safe and appropriate bike, is finding parts for this motor. I can't find it on the internet, and it needs parts. If you get Bosch or Bafang or Shimano motors, then you'll be able to find parts for them. That's requirement one. Minimal. For me, a minimum requirement two is a front disc brake. I'd like to see every e-bike have at least one disc brake, and that disc brake be on the front. It's an expensive retrofit, so if you're buying one, look for it. A tell, as I mentioned before, with reference to this crankset, is alloy components. If you look for alloy, they cost more money than steel, so you'll notice that this stem here, gooseneck, is pitted and rusted. It's a beautiful old thing, but if it were alloy, it wouldn't be pitted or rusted. And alloy components mean that somebody spent some money on the bike. Another thing that is really important, this bike has them, oddly, is stainless steel spokes. They're stronger and they last longer than mild steel. So stainless steel is what you want. If you can afford it and move up, better than the bike I just outlined is a bike with belt drive. That's what's changing. That's what's happening to chains, is they're being replaced by belts. The same technology that is the drive belts inside automobile engines. Timing belts are made. And at about 200 watts of power, a belt becomes more efficient than a chain. So if you're a high-end cyclist, or if you have an electric motor attached to your bike, a belt is a better way to go for driving. Internal hub gears built into the rear wheel. They take less maintenance, and they're beginning to manufacture internal hub gears designed for power. That's important. And if you really want a Cadillac, get hydraulic brakes all the way around. They're better. Let's talk about money and now. This bike, about 1,100 euros. This bike, twice that easily. The Bafang conversion bike over here that you looked at earlier is about 1,500 euros in components and parts to put it together. Why is it so much more expensive than the others? It's got better brakes for starters and a better motor. But the real message, I suppose, is if you're seriously interested in getting an e-bike and you don't have the opportunity to bring what you're looking at down here for us to help you, and we're available to help you vet out an e-bike if you're considering one and you can borrow it. But basically, it's a good idea to buy local. Go to a local bike shop that sells e-bikes and buy one, because then you've got somebody behind you who can repair it, and you know it's at least a minimal quality. So although I don't generally mention brands and people, I wouldn't buy your first e-bike on the internet. If you absolutely want the least expensive e-bike for your quality, Halford's sells a line that aren't bad, and Halford's has a warranty. If you want to buy a used e-bike, particularly a production one, you might go to City View Wheels in Cork City. I like those people. They're good. Patrick is a good person. But they buy and sell e-bikes just like cars. As a consequence, they usually have a store of used e-bikes and new e-bikes that are warranted, and you can try them out right there, just like the good old days. If you're going to buy new, and you have the time, come in and talk to one of the yard dogs, me or one of the minions, and we'll help you pick a good one. If you haven't, buy from somebody you trust. Buy from a good source. Buying used on the internet is only for people who know their e-bikes. You can really buy some doggies. I suppose on that happy thought, I'll wish you good biking and enjoy.